Welcome to the space. It's nice to have you, Charles. Um, we're just letting a few people get back into the room. And while we do so, I'd like to open up by giving an introduction about what we're doing here today and just discuss some of the topics we'll be going over. So I am your co-host, Megan Nilsson. I go by Crypto Megan on social media. I'm a high-end crypto and NFT consultant, currently on a world tour advocating for education across all levels and women in Web3. And I will be hosting the Proof of Talk event next week at the Louvre in Paris. And this is kind of like a pre-talk for that. And we're just so honored, and it's a privilege to have Charles on today to discuss a lot of topics that are aligned with the Proof of Talk conference, including, just where we're at as an industry right now. It's such an important crossroad after all of the bad actors have been washed out. And, we're kind of left here in the bear market with the people who are building and creating that solid foundation for the future, having this discussion about how industry leaders can come together and do better and pick up the pieces. And so on that note, I'd love to segue over to Charles, our esteemed guest for the day, Charles Hoskinson, the founder of Cardano. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I hope everybody can hear me all right. Twitter Spaces has always been a little glitchy, but it's a heck of a lot of fun because we get to interact with people real time and we get huge audiences.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you being one of the most important voices on the precipice of one of the most important changes in human history, I couldn't think of a more important room to be in.
You're too kind. I just try to be the guy in the back pushing things along and getting things done. I mean, we've made enormous progress as an industry over the last 13 years. We've gone from nothing to a movement that probably has more than 100 million people. That's pretty much in every country at this point, for better or for worse. And what's so cool is we've opened up such a great conversation about owning your own identity, having economic agency, being your own bank, and just pushing power to the edges. And pretty much every industry at this point, from how to vote to supply chains to basically your money. And it's so cool to see that go from a hypothetical to a reality where pretty much if you wanted to, you could completely live in the cryptocurrency space end to end. That's something I never thought would happen so quickly.
Absolutely. It's like the fastest growing technology adoption curve in history. And it is just so incredible to witness the maturation of the industry, but also the Cardano ecosystem, having been actually one of the first projects I ever really investigated and invested into because I really loved the proposition of what this community is about. And so as we, begin this discussion, I'd like to set the stage a little. I just listened to one of your live streams. It's called Why We Fight. And it was just so incredible. I highly recommend everybody go listen to that because, what he says in there is just so important for the evolution of our nation and our world and society as a whole. And, some of those topics are really important in setting the stage where we're at now. The world stage, which is, what we're fighting for on the other side of this and how we're going to get there and how the Cardano ecosystem is empowering that. And I just love some of the stuff that you defined in the fight that we're fighting right now. It's kind of like two parallel worlds where we're fighting for basic human rights, for freedom, for control, sovereignty, self-sovereignty, sovereign identity, control of our money. And, the society has to come together as a whole to make that happen. So I really, really love what you said in that interview, and that the next 10 years will be the biggest years of change in human history. So I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit on the actual fight that's going on, and what's been happening in the Cardano scene recently to kind of like counter that fight.
Yeah, a lot of people want to focus on a particular thing like, oh, the SEC said this or this agency said that or that. Those are all just symptoms of a broader desire. And what I tried to emphasize in Why We Fight, as well as some of my tweets, was that for the first time, we've actually seen the hand. And normally, when you see this global change with these transnational bodies, they're very quiet about things and they kind of hide it through death through committee. So you never actually get to see all the pieces come together. But it's very clear. There's a group of people in the world that they hang out at WEF and they really love a lot of these transnational bodies, and a lot of them are actually in the Biden administration. And these people basically want a world where there's a CBDC for each country that is in basically a public-private partnership with large, powerful, mostly government-controlled banks. And it has a strong ESG and DEI mandate connected to money. So basically, all your money is digital. It lives on a phone and through other media like that. And the government basically looks at what you buy and looks at the economy as a whole and gets to decide little levers about what to turn on and off. So let's say they decide that they're using too much carbon in a certain area, and you go to fill up your tank of gas, and it says, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you've already filled up your Mustang this week. You're going to have to wait until next week to buy gas." So you have the money. You could be a millionaire, you can even be a billionaire, but you're not legally allowed because your money's been turned off to go and do something. Now, the other thing is it will be a financial panopticon. Every transaction you've ever made, every person you have a financial relationship with is completely known. I don't know about you, but I don't think I want my Amazon shopping cart like known by everybody in the entire world. But that's basically what the CBDC angle is going to push. And they're also going to put suitability guidelines for the products you're allowed to buy in terms of financial products. So whether you can invest in a certain stock or commodity, let's say gold, the US dollar starts weakening a little bit. They say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you can't buy any gold anymore. We're just going to soft ban gold by preventing you from buying it." You see this already in Canada where they're actually restricting which cryptocurrencies you can purchase. And they say, "Oh, you're only allowed to buy a certain amount of ADA, but it's okay to buy Bitcoin and Ethereum," for example. That's just an example of where this is already starting to occur. So that is the agenda. That is the goal. And so obviously crypto is the enemy of that. So what you have to do is invent this bizarre narrative that somehow crypto is bad for you and somehow being in charge of your own life, having freedom is a bad thing. And the nanny state has to come in and protect you from cradle to grave and give this type of a system. Why? Because it's the only way that I think the WEFites can get ESG globally between everybody in the world. If you really want to reduce carbon, if you really want to enforce certain business practices on people, the most effective way of doing that is having control over people's money. Because literally what you can do is you can just push a button and turn it off. And, it's not a conspiracy theory. If you actually look at the transnational papers that they write, with the World Bank and all these CBDC proposals, they're actually saying this is a feature. This is going to help us with the ESG movement. This is going to help us usher all of this in. And look at all the benefits. And it's going to be so easy to give subsidies and universal basic income and all these other things. And what they never tell you is the quiet part is, oh, by the way, it's also really easy to sculpt every economy in the world in any direction that we want. So this is really the test of our time. And in the next 10 years, we are going to see this not only be the fight, but we're also going to see a reevaluation of the data economy, the identity economy, and the AI economy. So basically, who owns your identity? You or a transnational corporation you've never met, you don't interact with, but somehow they own it. Who owns your data? Is it you or someone else? And who gets to make decisions? In many cases, you look like China, what they're doing with their CBDC and social credit, almost all of the decisions of who gets to play, who doesn't get to play, those decisions are actually made by algorithms that AI runs. So all these large language models, all these AI models that are evolving at exponential rates, eventually they're going to be basically put into every commercial transaction, and they're going to be able to make case-by-case determinations, almost as if you have like a commissar from the Soviet Union or a Stasi from East Germany sitting in the room watching you as you do things. That's what China's doing, real time, and not at small scale. They already have 200 million people with Tencent into their CBDC, and they're combining with social credit. This is the desire of some people. So this is the fight of our lifetime. And, frankly, nothing matters. There are a lot of moon boys running around there. Oh, which NFT is going to be big? Is it SNEC or is it this thing or Hosky coin or that? It's like, why does any of that matter? Look at Jack Ma. He was one of the richest guys in Chinese history, super powerful guy, super big and prominent guy, pissed off the government. Now he's learning Taoist poetry, wandering the streets of Bangkok, playing golf, and hoping to God he doesn't get purged. Or look at all the powerful, rich, billionaire Russian oligarchs. The minute that they piss off Putin, they have a whole epidemic of falling out of windows. It's a terrible thing. They have the shoddiest windows you'll ever see in Russia. It's all these billionaires are falling out of windows. Well, go figure. So does it really mean anything or matter to have all this money and power and be rich if you live in a society that's authoritarian, or a society that's even like 1984 authoritarian, where the authoritarian is actually an algorithm that you can't influence or control. So to me, I've always been a libertarian at heart. I say, just let people be free. Let people have rights. That's the original American invention. We wrote the Constitution, we had the Bill of Rights, and we thought that if people could have their own faith and people could have their own speech and the right to assemble and fundamental human rights, God-given rights, that we as a society would be better off. And that built the greatest nation in human history. And now we have a war for the identity of that nation. And there's people who have decided that we no longer have the right to have that. We should live in a dystopian society. And I think the cryptocurrency movement at its core is not an economic one. It's one about freedom and liberty. So I will say that from mountaintops. And what you see going on with Coinbase and all this stuff with the SEC, those are just tools to basically push us in that particular direction. And we have to stand up and say, no, we like to own our own identity, have our own economic agency, and be in control of our lives.
Wow, that was incredible. And it gives me the goosebumps to think that this is the cry heard around the world right now is the importance and the necessity for freedom. And what you say in some of these talks is that people fall into the easy trap of let the government take care of me because the government says that they know better, that they can do better for you. And I really like what you said about, this is gonna if we do this right, we pull it off, we reset the relationship from the governed to those who govern. And we go from don't be evil to can't be evil. And one where you're in control. And that's so powerful because we have the chance to fight back and take that back. And you also say that we have a choice now. We can either be on the pyramid side, which is the typical way that the society has been run up until now, or we can opt out for the circle side, which is the open side, which allows access and equality for all. And that's what we're fighting for now. So that's just so incredible to me. And one last thing you said is that there's a glitch in the matrix in that they'll say we need to use CBDCs, but we can actually use crypto. And that's revolutionary, and that can be facilitated by Cardano. So I'd like to segue into some of those ideas. But before we get there, I'd like to welcome our other co-host, Zohair, who will be heading Proof of Talk. And I'd like you to just segue into some of the other more important topics that are related to what Charles has been discussing.
Perfect. Thank you, Megan. Charles, really appreciate having you with us. I'd like to connect to what you just said about positioning ourselves and what Megan called, like, we have the choice now. And like, really from a practical point of view, it's clear that the widespread adoption of blockchain technology is still in its infancy. And looking at the next 5 years, what do you see as like the significant shifts that will facilitate like real world utility, even in the face of potential external obstacles that we see right now? And specifically, how is Cardano going to position itself to drive this forward in a very practical sense? Because of course, it's a fight, we're fighting, but how are we really going to do that despite all these external forces?
Well, what you do is you just go to places where there's a need and nobody pays too much attention to. We've been in Africa since 2016, as an example. Mergo's been in Southeast Asia. There's a huge Cardano community in Latin America. And these are the 3 billion people that over the next 10, 15 years are going to get banked and for the first time ever have economic and digital identity. They have no preconceived notions. There's no Microsofts or Googles or others, JP Morgan Chases to step in. And they can go full crypto or they can go full dystopia. So we're in Kenya, we're in Ethiopia, we're in a lot of places. And you talk about concepts like, wouldn't it be cool to have self-sovereign identity? Oh, yeah, of course. Why? Because identity systems we have right now suck. Oh, wouldn't it be cool to actually have a credit score that's not controlled by an oligarchy of 4 companies that basically can game it in any particular direction? Your merit, your character, and your history actually mean something. You can carry that with you country to country. It's transnational and no corporation's in charge of that. Oh, yeah, of course. And you ask a lot of people that are in these jurisdictions, do you think the local money is great? Look at Argentina, like 100% inflation. No, they want to get out of the peso. So you're like, hey, I got this other money, I'll take it. So you don't really have to work very hard to convince them to get off peso or the local currency and go to do something else. And then you go and say, do you trust the banking system? Oh, God, no, they steal our money. So they already kind of get that this is the way to go. And they already kind of get that being in charge of their own things from historical grievances is really going to restore that trust gap. And here's the thing, you get 3 billion people into a parallel economic system that's more credible and better, more efficient, they win. Okay. And All humans are equal. There's no secret sauce here that somehow it's guaranteed that an American has to be in charge instead of a British, instead of a Kenyan. Okay, everything resets with technology, and all these people have the same access to the same internet, the same large language models, the same social networks, the same cell phones that we do. And Africa is actually the youngest continent. 70% are under the age of 30. So when we talk about where the next Microsoft, Googles, Facebooks are going to be formed, probably actually Africa, not the United States, especially given that we're ossified, bureaucratic. And right now we're really good at killing our industries as opposed to embracing and platforming, growing our industries. So go play it the capitalist way. Go give them access to technology, make it work real well, make it work at scale, make it work 10 times cheaper than the legacy system. And then, the free market's going to go and make it work for 1 billion people, then 2 billion people, then 3 billion people. And it doesn't really matter at that point what the Europeans, the Americans, or others say, because they'll just basically be outcompeted. Either they change or die. I'm sure there's plenty of newspapers that saw the internet and said, oh, screw that thing. Oh, we're newspapers. We're big and scary. You can't stop us. That are now completely out of business. Look at what happened in the industry. Why? They got disrupted. Why do we need custodians? Why do we need broker dealers? Why do we need, multi-day settlement for securities transactions? Why do we need all these complicated identity providers that suck value out of every transaction, these multi-sided marketplaces with middlemen of necessity instead of value? We don't need any of these things. We can get rid of them in a heartbeat if we adopted cryptocurrencies. And the people who do it are going to be far more competitive, better at business, and ultimately there's more trust and integrity in the system. I can build with Cardano a voting system that would make the American election system look like a toy. And we are doing it with SIP 1694 and other innovations that we're bringing to the marketplace. What does this translate to? Free and fair elections. It's kind of screwed up that the thing that decides the person who's going to be the most powerful person in the world is an inferior system to a system built by a collection of volunteers and companies for an internet protocol. But that's where we're at. And you know what? If it's built for Cardano, it's actually accessible to nation states, corporations, clubs. So suddenly the best voting systems in the world are going to be free to use or very low cost to use on a protocol and open to everybody. Rise together, that type of a thing. And as nation states adopts this, they contribute to it, and that organism gets more and more powerful. So that ecosystem thinking, that resilient organism thinking, that network effect thinking, that marketplace thinking is how you win. Okay, because the other people, what they think is protectionism. How do we punish people? How do we harm people? How do we close people out? How do we use nepotism and corporatism and regulation as a cudgel to prevent people from surviving? Meanwhile, on the other side of it, we're lifting people out of poverty, and very practically speaking, you just start with the bread and butter stuff. Microfinance transactions, remittances, supply chain, small-scale securities, small-scale investments, these types of things. You go to jurisdictions that are quite ready for it, like Kenya, and then very quickly that wildfire spreads across Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa, and then you wake up in 5 years, you have an end-to-end global financial operating system with trillions of dollars of assets and an organic circular economy. And what we also do is we take back AI. Instead of having 5 companies control all these models and decide what truth is and use RLHF to basically indoctrinate AI to only have one version of history, why don't we go ahead and have an open AI, truly open AI, not closed AI, which is actually what that company is, and why don't we actually do that? Why don't we also do the same with social media? Why in God's name do we have a central company basically get to decide who gets to play in a social media protocol? Isn't information supposed to flow freely? We have the Fediverse, we have ActivityPub, we have the app protocol. These are basic building blocks. Combine them with DIDs and cryptocurrency principles, and you can crush Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and these other things. I'm sorry. 4 or 5 guys don't get to decide how 5 billion people communicate with each other. And if we say the wrong things, we get banned, even when the wrong things actually turn out to be true. Like, for example, a lot of the things we saw with lockdowns and a lot of things we saw with the Hunter Biden laptop and all this other stuff. Turned out it was true. But if you said it and the wrong gatekeepers were there, you'd basically be not only deplatformed, some cases, if you were a YouTuber, you'd lose your job, your livelihood. And they say, well, it's a private company. They're allowed to say what they want. Well, yeah, it's a private company that also happens to be working with the FBI and the federal government to decide what you're allowed to say. We call that a public-private partnership. That's fascism. Okay, and that's not acceptable. So I can complain about it. I can somehow naively believe if we elect different people that they'll just be generous and nice. No, they'll just misuse the things just like the other political party misused it. So how you truly affect change is you change the system. You got to change the rules to win the game. And changing the rules means we go from centralized to decentralized. We go from centralized power brokers to power to the edges. We go from putting some people in control to putting everybody in control. And we make sure that everything has a bedrock of some basic principles like inclusive accountability. That's your personal ability to check. The magic innovation of Bitcoin was that you never trusted a third party to verify if the money you have in your wallet is real. You can check it yourself if you run the software. And that principle can be extended to everything. Imagine an election system where you can verify the votes yourself. Imagine a money system where you can verify everybody you're doing business with actually has the money. Imagine an identity system where you can verify yourself that they are who they say they are. These types of things. That is the promise and dream of this industry. And somehow this is completely missed. People like Paul Krugman and completely missed by Gary and all these other dudes that are just running around basically telling us that, no, we don't need any of that. Why? Because they reject the premise that we need these capabilities. They think that people shouldn't be allowed to check themselves. They think that truth should be monopolized by the few for the many and changing anytime it's politically convenient. There was an experiment in the 20th century for that. It's called the Soviet Union. They ran it for a while. Didn't work out so well for the people who lived under it. I don't think humanity wants to return to that. And unfortunately, they're trying to build a techno-dystopia Soviet system with CBDCs and basically public-private partnerships with these giant multinational corporations that are accountable to nobody, and basically a systematic erosion of democratic institutions and a convincing of people that they no longer have objective truth or reality. It's whatever the government says so.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's resoundingly clear that the old ways are dying. And I love what you said about change or die. Change or die. That's where we're at right now. And the people who are threatened by this new model of governance, one that's governed by the people and not by the few at the top governing for the masses, or the triangle, as you describe it in one of your live streams about the old ways of doing things. It's so resoundingly clear that they're so threatened by this. And that's why they're resisting it, because it is a threat to that type of power structure and the closed AI and the closed source. In this transition, they will no longer have that kind of power. So I guess what's on my mind is how we would be able to effectively communicate this to the people who are governing now, and how we could incite those changes within that organization. Because, as the world is right now and on the world stage, I mean, there are many talks by governing bodies about, what is centralized, what is not decentralized. And coming from you, Charles, how would you describe the measure of decentralization and, the decentralized identity and the constructs of that?
Well, that's a great example of something everybody says, but they don't actually have the ability to cash check. You'll see everybody in cryptocurrency space say we're decentralized, but what the hell does that actually mean? It's like saying I'm fashionable. Everybody has a slightly different definition of fashionable. You should see my shoes choice. So what we decided to do was set up a lab at the University of Edinburgh, and they created something called the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. They brought a bunch of academics together. They looked at things, everything from traditional measures that are used for antitrust in the last 100 years by, like the FTC and others for Sherman antitrust stuff. They look at things like the Nakamoto coefficient, the Gini coefficient, the control of developers. There's a lot of different metrics, and they've come up with several measurements, and they have a paper coming out. We had one last year at ScottFest, and we have a new one called Tau Decentralization. And we're going to do a bunch of presentations throughout the summer about it. And then actually they're going to start systematically measuring the top 10. Look at Bitcoin, look at Ethereum, work their way down. And, for the first time ever, we'll have a number. Might not be perfect, but at least a lot goes into it. And then you can see a number, and then at least we have something that we can talk around. And then the people who disagree with that number, we can have an intellectual conversation about, okay, what needs to be added or taken away, what's unfair about it. And what's going to probably happen is the majority of people who disagree with it, they don't disagree on the facts and circumstances. They disagree with the outcome. They don't like the fact that they're not as decentralized as they say they are. Now, as a community, this gives us a North Star. It's not good enough to say decentralization, decentralized government, you're in control, go make a decision. You need to give each and every person a set of metrics to optimize around. Okay, so you need to say, look, if we as a community decide that it's a real good thing to decentralize, we ought to have a way of measuring it and understanding that as we adopt protocols, whether we move to the worse or better, and what's the trade-off. So here's a great example. There's a lot of things you can do to speed up your consensus protocol to process more transactions per second. Very rarely, when you do those things, does it also decentralize your system. Every now and then you get lucky, and that's called science, and you do a big protocol innovation where you get more decentralization, more processing power. But a lot of the cases, the things that are done in our industry to speed up TPS also centralize the network around fewer people. So then you can actually have, as a government, because Cardano is under control of the people, SIP 1694 memorializes what we already know. And what it basically does to that government of Cardano is say, is it okay, this SIP that's going to give us maybe 50% more TPS to reduce our level of decentralization by 10%? That's a policy consideration. That's a discussion. That's a debate to have. And if you have good institutions and also a constitution, you create some guardrails to have a productive debate. And those North Stars basically get you where you need to go. But, I'm a big guy and just solve the damn problem. Don't ask for permission. Don't go and beg. Don't complain about stuff. Stop being cynical. Just go out there and solve problems. And so if EDI is not the thing, you know what? Some asshole is going to create something better. And I'll adopt that if it's better. That's okay. But what's not okay is to sit on our thumbs and say, well, nobody helped us out. Oh, well, poor as us. You have to be an optimist. You have to be disciplined. And you have to inculcate into the community an activism that says the status quo is never acceptable. As long as our human rights are being violated, as long as our freedoms are being taken away from us, and as long as we're being told that we shouldn't be in control of our own lives, there's always work to do. And cynicism is an invention of those who try to take something from you, to try to take your morale away, to prevent you from having the energy, power, and passion necessary to change the status quo to a new status quo where you get your human rights back. It's learned helplessness. So the key is you have to lead as a community, and you start with North Stars, and you agree on some basic principles about things like how to measure decentralization, how to measure performance, how to measure utility, these types of things. And then you create a government that can then have real conversations around those North Stars and trade-offs around them and decide year by year what the metrics should be. If you want to move the trade-off window, you got to do basic science. So you have to invest some money in that, just like energy. If you want to generate better electricity, you got to go build fusion power plants, and you got to go figure out how to make geothermal better, these things. And when you have a big innovation, then suddenly you don't have to deal with the trade-offs of old nuclear energy and windmills and coal power and these types of things. But nothing is free. You have to decide what your budget is for innovation, and you have to decide what your budget is for execution. So where is today? Where is tomorrow? And a good government can balance those types of things against North Stars, which should be always principles-based. And we should always be able to look back 5 years, 10 years, and say we've considerably improved the human condition. This is one of the reasons why governments refuse to talk about HDI and they talk about GDP instead, because GDP is easy. You can make the rich richer and GDP goes up, but you can't make the rich richer and screw the poor and destroy the poor and make the HDI go up. So you have to have everybody rise together. You see, so you need equivalent metrics when you talk about these types of protocols and say how many people truly are self-custodying, how many people are actually in control of their finance, how many people actually are educated and understand these paradigms, how many people are in self-sovereign identity, and never let anybody come to you and say, well, people are just too stupid to figure that out. No, that's some arrogant person assuming that everybody around him is stupider than him and trying to convince the world that that's an okay notion. If people don't understand it, then that's one of our North Stars of how do we educate people and how do we actually convert people and grow them up. Everybody in the planet learned how to use a computer. Everybody on the planet learned how to use the internet. Everybody on the planet learned how to use a smartphone. I see 90-year-olds running around with iPhones. Don't tell me that people can't learn how to do very complicated things if they have the right mentors and right incentives. So what you need to do is structure things in the right way to facilitate that. And that's what Cardano is going to actually do as part of its growth. Now that we have this beautiful blossoming decentralized government, SIP 1694, that's coming. 43 workshops over the next 2 months, and then all of them will get aggregated together in Scotland, and a great consensus will emerge, and community will vote on it, get it in. Once that government turns on, it'll have all these beautiful North Stars, and there's going to be thousands of conversations just like this one across the globe about priorities and how quickly we want to move and who do we want to move with. And every year we make progress, and every year the human condition gets better, and every year we become a shining beacon showing that cynicism never works and optimism and the general goodness of people is the way forward.
Oh, wow. I really agree with you in the sense that I'm also a perpetual, forever optimist. And I believe that that's how change will be invoked. That's how we can, do this from the inside out instead of from the outside in, and the old model and the old way of things. And listening to now, it's important that we must not be complacent in accepting that, people aren't going to learn this, so this is impossible. Or, we must actually take action. Even in this conversation now, it feels like if governing bodies were to sit in and listen on these conversations and actively participating, we'd make more progress than they have in maybe 5-10 years. It's just a question of sharing those models and, the metrics and the measurements. So we have numbers to present them, and just making that progress little by little, and having something to present. So that was absolutely incredible. Thank you, Charles, for breaking that down. We're going to segue over now to another portion of this talk in which we reference more of the theme that we're looking at Proof of Talk, which is lessons learned from leaders. And so, Hare, go ahead. I think you have a question on this for Charles.
Perfect. So the mission of Proof of Talk is to bring leaders together to discuss, debate the past, reflect on learnings, and try to together ignite the future. And by definition, I would assume the roles of leaders is to pave the path forward for their community. And Charles, you're seen among these leaders. And I'd love to know, given the last 12, 24 months especially, from your viewpoint, what are the fundamental takeaways from the past that should shape and inform leadership and the leadership approach in blockchain?
Well, I mean, the best leaders, I think, are a combination of three things. First, they have to have real principles and integrity. They can't fake it. You can't fake integrity. You can't fake principles. Either you believe something or you don't believe something. And when you dislike a person, they say all the right things, but you see them, you just dislike them. It's usually because deep down inside, non-verbally, they're not actually agreeing with the words coming out of their mouth. They're just paying lip service to it, but they're prepared to change their position on a drop of a hat. So you have to have real integrity. You have to have real principles. And ideally, those principles ought to be formed with some form of objective basis in reality. Because you can have principles, like there's some, pagan cults out there that probably believe blinding every third child is a good idea or something like that. It's probably not a good society. But, that was like how ancient times worked, and it wasn't so awesome. So you have to have an objective basis in reality. You have to have good ethics, good principles. And then the second thing I would say is you have to really understand how to connect with people, listen to people, and try to really be empathetic and understand their pain. Where are they coming from? Everybody has a problem. If you sit on a subway, a bus, you sit on a plane, every person on that plane has a story. They have parents. Maybe some of their family has cancer. Maybe they have cancer. Maybe they just lost somebody that's important. Maybe somebody they know is in prison. Maybe they went to prison. Who the heck knows? Everybody's got a life story. But we tend to be, because of modern society, in this mindset, everybody's an NPC and they don't exist. And the only story that's valid is your own story. It's a very egocentric way of living life. Great leaders are able to connect with people and hear their stories. And then what they do is they take those stories and their principles and they create a meta story where they create a collective story, a collective movement. They pull things together. So it's just magical when you see it in action because everybody feels like they're on the same team then. And the third thing is that when people have divisions, they don't pick sides, but rather what they try to do is create a third option and transcend sides. The best leaders are leaders who find a way to make compromises work to the extent where people feel like that was always the way it was, not realizing that there actually was a conflict before. The worst leaders are the ones who become very effective at crushing one side and pushing them down, because the minute that other side gets back up, they're going to just crush the other side down, and then you have endless circular conflict. Okay, so you're winning for a time, But then, the other days, you're going to start losing. So look at the current political debate. They just indicted Donald Trump. Now, I fully appreciate it. There are a lot of people that really hate this dude. He's a very controversial person. But the precedent that they've basically set is that when the other political party gets into power, let's go arrest our opponents. Now we get we've gone from yelling at each other over cable news to actually using the Department of Justice as a political tool to just arrest people we don't like. And you can already see the Republicans laying out a very strong case to arrest Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. When they're back in power, why not do it? Because the threshold has now been crossed. So now basically every single president has to resign the day before they leave office, let the vice president pardon them, just to basically clean house, because this is how politicized our institutions have become. So how does that advance an agenda or actually lead and bring people together and unite people? It doesn't. It's a very destructive us versus them. And unless you're prepared to purge the other side, which is usually where these things lead in the long term, then you're going to have to accept the fact that you're never going to converge and agree. And it's getting to a point where we can't even agree on reality. Okay, the same set of facts, January 6th in the United States, you look at it and you ask one group of people, say it's a lot of rage and protest over people who feel they were treated unfairly and an election was stolen. Yes, the other side, they say it's the worst domestic terrorism since 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, and they tried to overthrow the U.S. government. It's the same set of facts, the same set of people, but they're so radicalized that we can't even agree what happened on a day. It's almost like Westworld, where say, what is that? It doesn't look like anything to me. People are living in different realities now. Great leaders are able to eschew that. They're able to remove that and put it into a place where people can actually start agreeing on a common set of facts, a common set of principles, a common set of, and be empathetic with each other, and then basically converge to a third option. And when we do that, those compromises tend to be enduring. They stick around for generation after generation, and they become treasures that each generation gives to the next generation and inherit. And that's what true social progress is. So any burgeoning leader, whether you're in government or you're in private industry, you're going to have to find a way to do those three things. You're going to have to find some principles. And if you don't have them, no one will ever follow you because they think you're two-faced. You're going to have to find a way to really listen to people and change your path in a way to accommodate their needs. And you're going to have to find a way to take conflict and turn conflict into compromise and have both sides agree that they're better off than in the conflict state. So it's very easy to show an absence of leadership. But what people need to do is take a step back and say, throughout the course of history, who were the great leaders? This is one of the reasons why I say there's some Marxism coming in. One of the first things Marxism does, or any philosophy that's like it, is they deify the people that venerate the government, and they destroy all of your heritage, all of your past. So if you go to the country of Georgia, you go to Poland, you go to these places, you'll notice that the Soviets took great pain in destroying the local languages, the customs, really destroying local monuments and rewriting history and pushing it into the Soviet way. They couldn't allow people to have an independent cultural heritage because that system was incompatible with independent thought. In fact, they built a monument in Moscow for a kid who turned in his own parents to the commissars. And they made sure that every year people would celebrate that kid, showing that the state is supreme over the family. You can't have a family unit be bigger than the state. You can't have dual loyalties. Always be loyal to that. So you have to understand where these regressive philosophies come. And you'll notice something, that all of our heroes in American tradition are being now venerated, torn down. Thomas Jefferson was the founder of University of Virginia. He was the third president of the United States, the author of the Declaration of Independence. He's now like persona non grata in University of Virginia, and they're trying to remove him from U.S. history. It's a pretty aggressive movement. And you don't deify these people, but you look at where they had great leadership, and you look at where they had tremendous personal sacrifice and challenges, and they were able to somehow overcome that, inspire people, and lead. And there's lessons to be learned there. Julius Caesar is another great example. By no means a nice person. He killed like 2% of the world population when he purged Gaul. On the other hand, he was the person who built the Roman Empire, and all of human history changed because of it. Obviously very inspirational and very goal-oriented for the people that followed him. So you kind of have to have the ability to set aside the good from the bad and look at certain characteristics. And the difference between being truly evil and truly good is having principles at your core. And so you say, okay, how do we take these generic lessons in leadership and where do the principles need to sit for an evolved society that goes beyond an ancient ethic or an enlightenment ethic and goes into kind of a post-enlightenment ethic of where we want to go in a world where everybody has instantaneous access to each other and everything can be fact-checked with AI, and each and every person actually can be given dignity as opposed to just a small elite group of people. So that's the advice I give to leaders. And unfortunately, I do have to get going. I have a hard stop here in 1 minute. This was a heck of a lot of fun, guys, and I really enjoyed it. And I wish we had more time to spend together.
Charles, thank you so much for that. I mean, it's just so enlightening to hear everything that you're discussing and your vision for the future. And in the end, the takeaways we can have from this is that, in your own words, acceptance comes from convenience and fear. And we must stand up and rise to this occasion as a community, as, one body has one direction, and we're all fighting for the same thing. And how do we do that most effectively together? So thank you so much for your incredible insights. Looking very forward to seeing the evolution of Cardano in the coming months, years. It's very exciting, and we thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, everybody, for attending, and please tune in to find out more about Proof of Talk. We will be doing the conference next week in Paris at the Louvre. Zohair, did you have any closing remarks? Oh, Zohair is already... Oh, he's not a speaker. Guys, please tune in and check that out. It's going to be absolutely incredible. It's going to be one-of-a-kind conference, and we're going to go over issues and topics like this with all of the industry leaders. It's going to be absolutely incredible, and maybe we can accommodate for some of your questions there. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, and have a wonderful night.